Hello, I'm Sue Stockdale, Association for Coaching's podcast host, and today I'm speaking to Mark McMordie, founding CEO of The Conscious Leader and co-author of Mindfulness for Coaches, an experiential guide. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Sue.
Now, I know you're one of the speakers at the Coaching in the Workplace conference, and your session is on the power of feeling safe, where you'll be exploring the neurophysiology of psychological safety in a highly practical session. I can't wait to find out more about that. And this idea of feeling safe is a topic that's been in front of mind for everybody of late because of the worldwide situation with the coronavirus. Now, as the world faces that uncertainty, what, from your experience, Mark, do you think leaders can do to be equipped to face that uncertainty and disruption with ease?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? Because it's something that is present for all of us. About, I guess, when the operating environment that we're all working in is clearly unsafe. It might sound a little bit paradoxical to kind of say, well, how am I meant to feel safe in that? But it really does matter. And particularly for leaders, but for everyone. Why? Because, the bottom line is at a neurophysiological level, if we don't feel safe and we feel in a threat response, there's going to be a whole bunch of hormones and neurotransmitters flooding our system, and we'll move into a threat response. And, threat responses are okay if you're running away from a tiger. And I'm not suggesting that some of the threats that are in our environment right now aren't a metaphorical version of a tiger. But the question is that, nobody's really had a good idea running away from a tiger. So in terms of accessing the part of our brain, which is more expansive in its thinking, more generative, particularly about creative and innovative solutions that are really needed right now. Mm-hmm. If you're experiencing a threat response, the chances of you accessing that are highly unlikely.
Do you think people are actually aware of what's going on in their brain, Mark?
To some extent, not. I mean, I just ran a webinar last week where pretty much everybody, there were about 90 people on the webinar, and all of them had turned up around the subject of mindfulness and stress reduction. So at some level, there seems to be an awareness that everybody's feeling a little bit more stressed, a little bit more on edge. Our working world and our home world has been turned upside down. What used to be a normal routine no longer exists. So this puts a lot more stress in the system. So people feel that. And then I guess they feel a little bit more jangled, a little bit more fragmented. And some will look to reach for something, to do something to take care of that. And in some cases, that might be going for exercise or going for a walk or walking the dogs. For others, it might be reaching for alcohol, which might serve its purpose in the short term, but over the long term might not really support. But then it's what the other things that we reach for that really help bring us back to center.
So as a leader in an organization, having a sense of your own degree of safety and comfort is going to be critical in terms of what you exude to your team, I would imagine.
Totally. I mean, one of the things we know is around emotional contagion.
Tell us more about that.
Well, if a leader is super stressed and is feeling really threatened by maybe their boss or the operating environment they're in or feeling under pressure, then chances are they're going to take that stress into a team meeting and transmit that to all of their team. So their stress becomes the team stress. And then if everybody's stressed and really worried and really threatened, what are the chances of the team doing their best thinking? Conversely, if you've got a leader that walks into the room who is fully aware of the threat that exists out in the marketplace, but is centered and calm and can really frame the issue in a way which is clarifying and helpful, and can then trust in the experience of the team around them to invite them into what I might call inclusive, inquiry-based leadership. To trust that they'll have assembled, in some cases with a board, a multi-million-pound team that have brilliant brains. So what about inviting that team in to do their best thinking in a way which is not panic-driven, but just enables enough space for everybody to think really creatively and innovatively about how they might approach the situation, but also the fact that there might be room for synergies and building on other people's ideas. So this is where it comes back to the coaching approach, which is a leader that's leading with a coaching approach. What are they actually doing? I think they actually start to see leadership as an act of facilitation and enablement of others, and to know that they don't need to have all the answers. They just need to facilitate and enable the collective intelligence around them to come up with their best thinking, their best adaptive thinking to respond to the challenges that we face right now. But that takes a particular style of leadership.
You make it sound all so simple, Mark, and of course we know it isn't necessarily. In order for leaders to facilitate that transformation, that generative thinking that you described, I know in the presentation that you're going to be doing, you talk about the concept of vertical leadership development. Tell us a bit more about that, how that relates to transformation.
Great question. So I'm sure many of the coaches listening will have a sense of this. They might even trained with some of the leading providers in the field. But, vertical development, I guess, goes back to some of the early work of the developmental psychologist Piaget, which really was looking at stages of development, predictable stages of development in children as they move into adolescence, and how they develop their capacity to work with and deal with complexity. Of course, that work was then taken on in the 60s by people like Lovinger and Graves, and they were just looking at how we as adults develop through from, the baby's narrow, self-centered view of the world through to the kind of the mature wisdom and powerful action of exemplary adults. So when we look at, in that last category, we might think of people like Gandhi or Mandela, and their capacity to navigate the complexities in their different contexts, but fundamentally to bring about societal transformation. So what is it about their individuals and the way that they make sense of the world, and the way that they engage with others, and the way that they engage with themselves, their levels of self-awareness, the way that they regulate themselves when things are happening around them that are very dysregulated? I think the most important part is how that they empathically or compassionately connect with other people and allow collective meaning making. And in the collective meaning making, allowing collective action, which becomes powerful. So this is really the vertical development. But of course, that's been brought into the world of work through people like Bill Torbert, Bob Keegan, Susan Cook-Reuter, Bill Joyner, and, particularly in the UK, David Rook and Harthill. His article is still firmly within HBR's 10 must-reads on leadership. 7 transformations of leadership really kind of lays out the terrain of what it might mean for a leader to develop vertically through these other stages of development, which puts them in a position to really navigate complexity with more ease, navigate ambiguity with more ease, and really facilitate transformational change. And I'm using my words carefully, facilitate transformational change. I hear a lot of talk in a lot of corporates that I work with about driving change. It's interesting language.
It certainly is quite a contrast from one to the other in terms of how you describe them there. And if I could build on that idea of facilitating change, one of the often quoted case studies is Google's Project Aristotle as an example of high-performing teams. One of the elements within that gets talked about a lot is the concept of psychological safety. Now, I know you'll be exploring that in your presentation as well, Mark. What is psychological safety in layman's terms, and how might that help in this journey to vertical leadership development and transformation?
So here's a simple definition of psychological safety. So it's the perception that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes.
In simple terms, putting your head above the parapet.
Totally. Yeah. Sticking your neck out without fear of having it cut off.
What was it that Google discovered that was important about that?
So what they discovered, obviously Google do a lot of data analytics, so they turned their data analytics team back on themselves. Huge 5-year study, and it was part of Project Aristotle, which was looking at what differentiates our highest performing teams. And they found a number of factors. So dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, impact. But the number one factor that differentiated their highest performing teams from the rest was psychological safety. And what they found was that when there's lots of different measures they used around this, but let me share 2 that give different aspects to it. If we think about a lag measure, a lag measure in sales, they found that in their highest performing teams where high psychological safety was high, sales were almost 50% higher. So that's a lag measure, and it's within a sales environment. But what's the lead measure that enables all of that? Well, it's this second part, which is teams that had higher levels of psychological safety were more likely to harness the power of diverse thinking. So now when we're talking about really leveraging cognitive diversity within a team, psychological safety creates the conditions where that can be true. Because again, if we go back to the definition, the perception that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, no matter how diverse, questions, no matter how silly, seemingly silly, concerns, is it okay to say that I've got a concern about a project that everybody else seems to be in complete agreement about? And mistakes. Is it okay in this team to really fail fast? Is it okay to own up to mistakes and learn from them quickly? Because if those conditions aren't present, you're not going to get much innovation.
So really what you're saying is that there's a direct correlation between how safe and comfortable people feel in a team environment to give of themselves, their viewpoints, etc., and the results that organization can achieve or that team can achieve. So it's not just a buzzword, it's in a way a must-have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the person, of course, that we have to really talk about in this is where this, I was going to say originated from. I mean, I think, so Amy Edmondson at Harvard. I mean, this is based on 30 years of her research. So this isn't just a phrase, this is a well-researched construct, which through Amy's research over the years has really, has a direct correlation with performance. And it's just, I think, it moved squarely out of the research field into practitioner field. And Project Aristotle was the place where it really came alive in terms of really being applied at scale within an organization. But this is based on, 30 years of research from a really smart Harvard professor.
Now, I know that one of the other things that you're very interested in and experienced in, Mark, is the concept of mindfulness, which plays a major role in the work that you do. How did you get into mindfulness initially?
I've always worked in organisational leadership development. I've always had an interest in organisational psychology. So I think probably 20 years ago, one of the people at the time that was inspiring me most was Daniel Goleman. All the organisation development and leadership development work I was doing was based around emotional intelligence. The idea that leaders who are more self-aware, who have a capacity to self-regulate more, who have a capacity to build a deeper empathic connection to others, and have a capacity to be agile with change. And there are many other dimensions, but that whole field of emotional intelligence really guided a lot of the work that I was doing. And then I hit a point where I was involved in a organisational transformation piece of work where basically the wheels came off. There was a failed SAP implementation and it wiped millions off the bottom line. And at that point, I thought I knew a thing or two about organisational transformation. And then I thought, maybe I don't. What do I need to go and look at and attend to now? And I thought, well, actually, maybe before starting to think about transforming organisations, I should start with transforming myself. So I just finished reading a book by Daniel Goleman, which was called Destructive Emotions. And it was a commentary on some of the early dialogues between Western scientists and the world of Buddhism. And it was recounting some of the early studies where they put Tibetan lamas and meditation practitioners under brain imaging technology. And they were starting to see that apparently at will, these experienced meditators could control the emotional control centers of the brain. So for me, as a bit of a nerd around emotional intelligence, this was a revelation to think that actually there were some people that had used very practical skills, i.e. meditation and mindfulness training, to develop extraordinary levels of emotional intelligence. So I thought, well, I better go and check it out. So I went to Dharamsala, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama lives, and a bunch of those Tibetan monks who were under the brain imaging technology. And I thought, well, this feels like a good place to learn about this stuff. So that was over 15 years ago now.
And once you had that experience and you'd begun your journey of learning about mindfulness, in what way has it helped you?
So I think it helps me in a couple of respects. One is I think about for me as an individual. In other respects, I think about working with teams. So particularly right now, but always, life can be a fast-paced river. What mindfulness practice offers me is the opportunity to just press pause and stop and notice what's going on for me, what thoughts are around for me, what emotions are there, what physical sensations am I experiencing in the body that might be linked to some very strong thoughts or emotions. But also, what are my impulses, about things that I might want to say and do, some of which might be a good idea, other ones might not be. So at some level, it builds my level of self-awareness about what's going on for me right now, really. When I've got a better level of self-awareness, there's more capacity for me to actually self-regulate. If there are things that I might say or do that maybe just really won't be that helpful, I don't need to say or do them. But equally, if there are things that I'm suppressing that actually are important for me to say or do, I can equally become aware of those. And then it just moves into other things. Like we know that with meditation, it develops a part of the brain associated with empathy, the insula. So this isn't necessarily about learning empathic listening skills. This is about developing the part of the brain which increases empathic connection. So all of that helps. It also helps to roll into having difficult conversations well, where I can communicate authentically what's going on for me, but also I can listen deeply empathically to another person. And then, one of the things I'm going to refer to in the session at the conference is compassionate leadership. So this is something that Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn operates from, and he refers to it as a daily practice. So those are some of the things from a team perspective. I'm working with a team at the moment, and we basically do a couple of things as a matter of course. First thing is we do a short practice and afterwards ask them to give a weather report. What's their inner weather like?
Great question.
Because if they're really stressed out and they're really triggered, that might be associated with the threat response. They might be operating from a different regulation system, which might be about seeking rewards and moving towards a goal, or they might be in something we call calm and connect. But depending on how somebody's showing up and what their internal weather's like, it's a pretty good predictor about what's going to happen next. And it's not to say that people should have weather one way or the other. It's just to know how it is right now and to operate from there. And then the other thing that I invite them to do is to not just notice more about themselves, but notice what they're noticing in themselves, in others around them, and in the system around them. Because when we're working in an environment that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, things are changing by the hour and by the day. So if we're going to work adaptively as a team or as a leader, you have to anchor people into what they're noticing as it's emerging, hour by hour, day by day, because it's moving constantly. And then if you can get people operating from that, then you've really got a chance of a team working adaptively, innovatively. And then, funnily enough, they start to become really aligned to what's emerging around them and being very responsive to what's there. That seems to deliver good results.
So I can see how your exploration of mindfulness really connected in and gave you greater insight into emotional intelligence. And the other thing that has also struck me from what you're saying, Mark, is the importance, and you didn't use this word, and I perhaps think it's an important word to include in our conversation here, is listening without judgment. Because my sense is it's the judgment we attach to the things we're listening to and watching that sometimes get in our way. What's your take on that?
Wow, you've hit to the heart of the matter. Yeah, anybody who will have, any coach listening to this or leader who will have engaged with something like, it's quite common now, and a program called the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction will have heard of Jon Kabat-Zinn. So he's one of the people that has popularized mindfulness in its current secular context. And, the definition that he applied to mindfulness was about paying attention in the present moment, non-judgmentally. That final part is really, it's the transforming piece. It's certainly the transforming piece as it relates to vertical development and leading in this kind of environment. Because the thing is, Jon Kabat-Zinn would say, we all have judgments. We have a human mind that judges. But if we're so convinced that we're right and we know, then our capacity to listen to other people, particularly those that might have diverse views, is reduced. So one of the things that Amy Edmondson talks about as being a game changer around psychological safety are leaders that first and foremost showing up with situational humility. That says, in this context, I can't possibly know. I can have an idea, but my perspective is only partial.
I love that.
So if that's true, then what's my capacity to listen without judgment to diverse views, some of which might be different to mine? And can I really listen non-judgmentally and be very open to then stay open to ideas that are different to my own and see what room I have to integrate some of those in? And therefore, within a team, can we, the role of the team leader maybe becomes around integration of diverse views into a much richer, more robust solution. But all of that is founded on, a language we might use within coaching is presence, coach presence, the capacity to show up open, non-judgmental. And in this space, to offer something that Nancy Klein talks about, which is generative attention, if I genuinely show up in a way which is curious and interested, and by definition, even without words, there's a sense of I'm communicating somehow, say more, go further in your thinking. I'm communicating an openness to hear more, for the other person to say more. When I offer that as a leader, wow, interesting stuff starts to happen. One of the pieces of research that's inspired me most links to the neuroscientist Stephen Porges. So he talks about something called the neuroception of safety. The neuroception of safety is something that we all know at some level. There are some people that we meet where we just have a felt sense that it feels safe and we can open up to them. Likewise, there are other people we meet where that isn't the felt sense we have. Well, what Stephen Porges points to is that isn't voodoo, it's linked to the vagus nerve. And some people just show up in a way which is embodied. It's embodied in their face and tiny micro expressions in the face. It shows up in their vocal tone. And when we hear that and we see that in somebody's vocal tone and their face, at an unconscious level, we experience them as being safe and we start to disclose stuff. So the bottom line is this is a connection between the face and the heart. It's embodied and it allows us to detect and project features of safety. So what's this got to do with mindfulness? Well, what it's got to do with mindfulness is there are plenty of studies that certain mindfulness practices actively develop the vagus nerve. So this develops our capacity to show up in an open state. And when we show up in an open state, then we can really invite teams into inclusive, inquiry-based practice. Throw out a really good question to the team and get them into inquire into it. It could be, how do we respond to coronavirus? Or different versions of that as it relates to a team. But get the team to do their best thinking. And if the leader can show up in a way that really communicates to the team without words, they really want to hear their best thinking from everyone. Then you've got the chances of arriving at really robust solutions that fit the purpose of what's arising moment by moment, day by day.
That's hugely powerful, Mark. I'm sure we could speak for hours longer on this fascinating subject, and I'm already feeling sitting here listening to your words of wisdom. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure that the listeners will be eager to hear your session at the conference as well. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks for your quality of attention.